honestly, I think it's just like finding my like authorial voice or whatever. And realizing that it's okay to put more of that humor in. So like I think that's a lot of why because Among Thieves is not the first book I've written, and the others didn't work. I think, I mean, for a number of reasons. I was learning how to write and all of that stuff too. But I think one of the reasons is that I was trying to be a little self-serious, right? Where it was like, oh, this is a lofty, grand tale, and that works in a lot of fiction. There are authors that do that incredibly well. At least at this stage in my writing career, I'm not one of them. Like, it's just not my vibe. Um, it's anyone that knows me in real life knows that it's really hard for me to take stuff seriously. I mean, like, obviously, like, I'm not like a dick about it, but like I tend to deal with things with humor, right? Like if something's going really poorly, I'll just be like, oh, and I'll make probably a dark joke about it. It's just, it's just how I handle life. And I think that allowing myself the space to put that in the story, instead of trying to disguise it with a bunch of flowery language and characters that are being chivalrous and whatever, was really helpful in getting something that actually felt authentic to write and hopefully feels authentic for people to read.
Hello and welcome to this special author Q&A for FanFiAddict. I'm Frasier Armitage, sci-fi writer and reviewer for FanFiAddict.com, and joining me today is an incredible author. She's the author of Among Thieves and its soon-to-be-released sequel, Thick as Thieves. She's also one of the co-hosts for the SFF Addicts podcast. She is awesome, the incomparable queen of fantasy heists. It is MJ Kuhn. Hi, MJ. How are you doing?
Hi, what an intro. I love that. I'll go with Queen.
Yeah, totally. You have the crown, MJ. The fantasy heist is yours. It's
I'm not
amazing.
sure. I think Lee Bardugo may have that particular crown, but I'll take it. I'll be her
Yeah.
squire.
Okay, Squire MJ. You've got this amazing sequel coming out, Among Thieves. For all those who've read it, everyone who I've spoken to about Among Thieves, they love it. And then this is the sequel coming out, Thick as Thieves. Can you tell us a little bit about what people can expect from it?
Yeah, so from the sequel, I need to like figure out how to talk about it without spoiling the first book because it's always so tricky. Like, oh, well, it starts like pretty much right after the events of Among Thieves. But basically, what you can expect from Thick as Thieves is our crew getting into more mischief, some of the same old shenanigans, a lot of new shenanigans. We do more betrayals, but different. We get new team ups and things shift around. We do have a few new characters that I hope people will enjoy as much as I enjoyed writing them. And yeah, should be a good time. It's a bit darker than the first one. I should mention that too. The stakes are a bit more intense and yeah, but it's still a good time and hopefully a fun read for people. So
It is a fun read. I can 100% attest to that. It is fantastic. There are shenanigans as well. That is a great. It should just have that on the cover. Just shenanigans.
just the
It's
word
like,
shenanigans. Yeah.
yeah,
The alternate
totally.
title.
Yeah. um, how did you approach writing a sequel as opposed to like writing the first book? Did it change in your approach?
That is a really good question. So I think there were a couple things that were very different and a lot of things that were the same. So for things that were different, I have never had to like sneak in because you can't just dive into the sequel assuming that people are coming hot off the presses from book one, right? Like sometimes people are going to binge read a series, and now that this is the final book in the series, it's just a duology. Maybe people will pick up Among Thieves for the first time and they will binge read it, which is great. But a lot of people that are going to come into Among Thieves haven't read, or Thick as Thieves haven't read Among Thieves in like over a year. So they may not remember the finer points. God, I know as soon as I set a book down after reading it, I'm like, wow, I really liked that. And someone's like, what was it about? And I'm like, couldn't tell you. Uh, so you have to like sneak little reminders in, right? Like remember this about the world. Remember, the adepts do these things, and those kinds of like little previously on the Tales of Timor little elements was a new challenge to sneak in. But yeah, so a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of authors that had a hard time with their second book, their sequel, because as they're writing it during their debut year, right when their first book is out, and they have a readership now, and people are, have expectations, and then they're bringing all of that into the process of writing the sequel. And I got to skip all of that because Among Thieves got pushed over a year because of COVID. So by the time it came out, Thick as Thieves was already written. So I am still nervous, like in the promo period and all of that. Like I really do hope that readers enjoy it and that I don't disappoint anyone that liked the first book. But at least I didn't have to write it with that hanging over my head. You know what I mean? Which would have made it a lot harder.
Yeah, totally. So if there wasn't like the pressure of writing the ending, because the thing is I mean, we're not going to spoil the book, but the ending is so satisfying to read. It's
Yay!
just like it's perfect. It ties everything up together that you hope to do. It's got backstory. It's just so good. So did you always know how it was going to end when you started writing it?
Yes and no. And I'm trying to figure out, we can talk offline because I'll tell you there was a surprise for me as I was drafting it that I wasn't expecting to happen. And I actually, like, as I was writing, I was like, no, that can't happen. And I was like, oh, I want to change it. I don't want that to happen. But I couldn't. You know what I mean? It was just like it wasn't ringing true any other way I tried to write it. So that I didn't know was going to happen. Redacted. but but no, the main pieces, right? Like where the big players on the board, where the big chess pieces end up. Yes, I definitely did know, and I actually had all of that planned out largely before I even set pen to paper on Among Thieves. Because I planned out the whole duology before I started writing the first book. And yeah, some stuff shifted in the middle, right? Things changed around. But the like final image of where we kind of end up, yeah, I was writing towards that the whole time. And so I really hope that I'm glad you found it satisfying. And I really hope that readers do, because there is nothing more frustrating than, investing in a full book, or a whole series and getting to the end and going like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. So
Was it emotional writing the ending?
it was in a lot of ways. I mean, for the most part, honestly, I just felt um like really happy and proud to have had the chance to complete the story in this way. I feel like if it was a longer series, it might have been more emotional, in that it would have felt like I was leaving, a place I'd spent many years in, which I guess I did because I started writing Among Thieves in 2016. So I guess I have spent many years into more. Um, but I think most of what I felt writing the ending was just like, big sigh of relief, like, oh, I'm excited that I've, made it to this finish line and I've done what I really wanted to do. I've accomplished what I hoped, with the story and with the characters. And I hope that the readers will agree.
What made you, so if it was all panned out before Among Thieves and you planned the two of them together, I'm intrigued about, because fantasy books, you can get some real chonkers. You can get like some really epic books, can't you? What was what made you decide to go for a duology as opposed to just turning it into like one huge book?
Honestly, the market. So like when you're debuting, you're a new author, like sure, there are some people that come out with their first book as a chonker. But if you're looking to kind of hedge your bets and get into, because I should clarify, I am traditionally published, and I was set on traditional publishing just for myself for a couple reasons, budget and other things, from the beginning. So I knew that going into trad pub with a first novel as an unproven, untested author that was going to be like 250,000 words, that was gonna be a tough putt. So instead, and it was nice. It worked out that we did kind of have, I didn't have two kind of complete arcs within the larger story that I wanted to tell. Um, So I think it worked out well to do, the first book, Among Thieves, is actually under 100,000 words. So it's quite short. It clocks in about 350 pages ish, which made it an easier sell, I think, to publishers and to bookstores, right, to stock it on their shelves, which kind of played in our advantage. And then the second book is a bit longer. I think it's about 50 pages longer or something like that. So it's a bit chunkier. I snuck a few extra words in, but still trying to, you know what I mean? Like play, you got to play with the industry, and that's like part of less the less sexy business side of the book world, right? Where it's like, you gotta, play with the rules.
No, that's totally legit. And it works as a duology because, like you say, like the arcs and the characters and the story and everything, they feel like two complete stories in themselves. You know, it doesn't feel like you've kind of written one story and then split it in the middle. You've two legit books. With them, with the characters, um, like with Among Thieves and with Thick as Thieves, they're so like vibrant and unique and individual and amazing. Which of them came first to you? Did they all come at once, or was it like was one of them? Did you start with one and then move on to others and others? And how did it work with like bringing these characters into life?
That is a really great question. The first character actually that came to me was Raya, which probably comes as a surprise to no one. I would argue, we have many points of view. So for anyone that hasn't read Among Thieves or Thick as Thieves yet, we have 5 or 6, depending on one of the POVs is like really scant. But POV characters, and Raya is probably the most main of our main characters. And I'm sorry, we have a cat visitor. He's throwing open shields. He says hello. Sorry.
Hello,
Uh,
Thorin.
but yeah, so Raya came to me first. I actually stole Raya from a book I wrote back in like 2014 that didn't work, right? Um, and so really not all of her, but just like, the core, like the sassiness and her honestly her powers that she has, the magic system, the ghost of that magic system was born in that old project that didn't work as well. So she came first, and then actually the rest of the characters came after I decided I wanted to write a heist. And what I did is I determined the archetypes that I wanted to fill for my heist team first. And then I fleshed out each character to kind of have someone that felt like they embodied that role, but also felt more fleshed out, more real, maybe some contradictions, some unexpected things about them, but where they would still fit that role and serve that purpose for our heist team. So, yeah, that was kind of how everyone came to be after that.
That's really cool. When it comes to, because you mentioned about multi POV, one of the things that I absolutely love about both of these books, and I don't know how you've managed it, is the balance of like when the when you move from character to character, and so like as the story progresses and as it unfolds, it's just there's the shifts are just totally just perfectly timed, and there's such a great balance across the whole thing. Um, have you got like any kind of tips for when it comes to like writing in multi POV for things that you've learned? So yeah, any advice that you've really benefited from, or that challenges that you've overcome?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I mean, I'll start by saying I'm not like, I'm not an expert. I'm just a joker that wrote some books. And I'm sure there definitely are people that do multi POV better than I do. But like the tricks that I've used. So the first one that I've used is my intense outlining, which anyone that's coming here from SFF Addicts knows that Adrian likes to make fun of me all the time for my very intense outlining process. So I outline in Microsoft Excel, and I'll do a column for each subplot or plot or character arc, and then a row for each scene in the book. And then I fill them in and I color code them, and that's the level at which I decide which POV I want every scene to be from as well. So I think that helps me get the balance, because then once I have it filled in and color coded and I think I have the book the way I want it, I can like literally just like control scroll zoom all the way out in my sheet and see if there's gaps, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, I go X number of chapters without even really touching on Tristan's character arc. Ugh, that's a problem. Like, let me add a scene, or, oh, you know what? Actually, this POV chapter, I have it from Raya's POV, but it would be so much more compelling if I switch it to Tristan, right? Or whatever the case is. Um, that is kind of how I did the balance. And then my other tip, this is like a silly tip, but it's fun and it works for me, and I hope it would work for somebody else if they tried it. To get so the trick that I try to do with the multi POVs is to have not only the dialogue in the character's voice, but the prose in the character's voice in each chapter, to some extent at least, right? So what I did during my editing process is I read the entire book out loud to myself, and I did a different accent for every character's chapters. And I don't do accents well. Like, I would never do them in front of people. Like, it's just like a horrible attempt at a British accent, right? Or Australian accent, right? Whatever the case is. But just like giving each character their own literal voice helped me to like suss out those sentences or the bits of the prose that was like, "Oh god, I don't think Evelyn would actually say it like that. This doesn't sound like Evelyn. Let me adjust this a little bit." So it took a long time, so it is a time-consuming, editing pass, but I feel like it was helpful for me at least. So hopefully if someone is trying it and is having trouble making their character sound, more distinct, give it a shot. It's a lot of fun.
I would love for you to just like switch between like different character accents for the rest of the interview.
Oh
Like
my
do this
god.
one as Ryan,
This
do this one as Evelyn. Like.
Like, literally, you don't even want to hear it because they're not good accents, like, they're terrible, but it's like a mental trick for myself, right? Like, "Oh, this one, Nash is gonna be whatever, Scottish in this iteration. Why? I don't know." Like,
Did you stick with the accents? Were they consistent through the whole thing for like books 1 and 2?
Probably not because because I can't do them well anyways. It's just, you know what I mean? It was just more of like throughout the whole pass, I would be consistent with which character was which accent. If you'd like to hear great accents for my characters, check out the audiobook. Because Zoe Mills does the audiobook, and she actually is very good at accents and gives them fantastic voices that sound organic to how I've described the character, unlike how I did it when I did it myself. This is why I don't do my own audiobooks. I'm not talented.
I I I think that there are quite a few people who would love to hear that audiobook, MJ. That would be absolutely brilliant. But with regard to like the voice, that's something that I wanted to talk to you about because whenever I mention this book to people and they've read it, like Among Thieves, that is, and I'm sure it's going to be the same with Thick as Thieves because it's got exactly the same tone about it. They all say, "Yes, I love that book. I love the banter. I love the atmosphere. I love the tone. I love the humor that's in it." And how long did it take you to sort of develop that kind of voice for and that being able to put that tone into your writing?
I think that is a question I've never been asked before, actually. So this is a great question. It's honestly, I think it's just like finding my like authorial voice or whatever. And realizing that it's okay to put more of that humor in. So like I think that's a lot of why because Among Thieves is not the first book I've written. I've said this on a couple other chats that I've been on with people, but it's actually like the fourth or fifth book I've written, and it's confusing as to which because like there was some reworks and blah whatever. But like let's say fifth. It's about the fifth book that I've written, and the others didn't work. I think, I mean, for a number of reasons. I was learning how to write and all of that stuff too. But I think one of the reasons is that I was trying to be a little self-serious, right? Where it was like, oh, this is a lofty, grand tale. And that works in a lot of fiction. There are authors that do that incredibly well. At least at this stage in my writing career, I'm not one of them. Like it's just not my vibe. It's anyone that knows me in real life knows that it's really hard for me to take stuff seriously. I mean, like obviously, like I'm not like a dick about it, but like I tend to deal with things with humor, right? Like if something's going really poorly, I'll just be like, oh, and I'll make a probably a dark joke about it. It's just, it's just how I handle life, and I think that allowing myself the space to put that in the story instead of trying to disguise it with a bunch of flowery language and characters that are being chivalrous and whatever was really helpful in getting something that actually felt authentic to write and hopefully feels authentic for people to read. I also think, the world of Among Thieves is pretty dark. It's a really screwed up magic system that I've created here, right? Where it's like literally like people are being bought and sold. This is terrible. And I do think that just having characters in the world that are working against that system and fed up with everything and just like, very irreverent about the small potatoes things that come up because like we got bigger fish to fry. I think that hopefully helps to make it not a doom and gloom read and make it a fun read, even though it's set in a pretty dark space.
Yeah, and I think that with fantasy and with sci-fi too, it's the same. Like a lot of people who don't read it just assume that a fantasy book is going to be like 1,000 pages of lore and
Yeah.
like with 100-page glossaries at the end, and sci-fi is
Right.
going to be incomprehensibly deep over these like huge themes. And to read a book that's playful in that
Yeah.
genre is just so, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's just like, oh yeah, this is what it can be. It's and it's just great. I loved the playfulness of it. I thought it was brilliant. But you mentioned about like the darkness of Tamor. Um, I'm pronouncing that right? Tamor?
Yes,
Because
I
the
just decided
entire
to be a
time I was reading it
jerk
as
and put
like
a
Tamor.
silent H in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was like the entire time. But I tell you this, for Raya, I only realized she was called Raya about halfway through Among Thieves. I'd been calling her in my head Rhea, and then I was like, why would MJ name a character Rhea? Like that's like that's a terrible name. It's
Yeah.
like it's like the front and Rhea. Nope. It's like Raya. It's like something in my brain and pronunciations just doesn't work.
No, and
But
you're
so
not alone. A
Tamor,
lot of people say Rhea as well. And they're always like, well, what's the right way to say it? I'm always like, well, I mean, I've made it up. So, like, there's technically not a right way to say it, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, Raya like rye bread is what I always.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As soon as
My
I
little
as soon as I was
pronunciation
like,
guide.
as soon as I twigged, I was like, of course it's Raya. How else are you supposed to pronounce that? But yeah. So Tamor, it's this like medieval arcane-ish kind of setting with like different kingdoms and lots of different politics in the air swirling and different types of places. When you're world building and you're inventing this and putting it together, what's your process? What are you doing to sort of like, are you sort of building that into your Excel, or are you just doing that free, in your mind, or how's it going?
Both and a secret third thing. So world building for me comes first. It comes before characters, it comes before plot. Just uh I don't know, because I like world building, I find it fun. Worlds come to me like in my imagination before anything else. But also I like that that's the case because I think world informs so much about the rest of it, right? Like all of us in some form are a product of the world in which we grow up in, whether we go with the flow or whether we rebel against society, whatever the case is, like we are still a product of the environment we grow up in. And so I start with world. And I begin with, I begin with just like chaos free writing, right? Like I literally will take a pen and a notebook, and when I like kind of have like a little earworm, it's sticking in my brain of a world that I think I might want to start building out. And I will just free write, and I call it nothing is wrong time. So it's like I will just write a bunch of stuff and nothing is wrong, right? Like, and a lot of it's going to be wrong. I'm going to cut most of it, but I have to go into the mindset of, or what's that Ted Lasso quote? Like, no, bring no umbrellas to this brainstorm, right? Where I'm just, I'm just gonna write, and make up whatever I feel like. And then after I have like probably 4 or 5 pages of handwritten nonsense with, progressively shittier handwriting, I'm gonna go through all of that. I'm gonna pick out the pieces that I really think work. And then I travel into Microsoft OneNote. And that is where I build my world. So I will draw a map terribly. Not a good artist, but I'll like draw it, right? Like in OneNote with the like basically Microsoft Paint feature. So I have a general layout of like the geography of my world. And then I will create tabs for every kingdom, or if I'm doing sci-fi, it might be planets someday, right? Like just your areas of the world. Um, and then I start to flesh out the details, right? I'm building in minutia right from the beginning. I want to build in what's the religion in this area? What are the holidays that people celebrate? What are people doing for fun? Like, what are their drinking games that they're playing in taverns? What sports happen in this part of the world? Who's in charge? What are the major cities? Are just all of these things? What of the other kingdoms or cities or whatever I'm building out? What's their relationship with those? What are the political ties? Is there political marriages that are causing strife or whatever the case is? What are the main trade exports? What's the climate like? So I'm looking to like literally make these feel real, and I have that information worked out for anyone that's read Among Thieves and or Thick as Thieves for all the kingdoms. So like even Gildemar, even Brielle that we, haven't really traveled to, and though, and even the Guildmaster's Island, Boris, all of them. I have all of that information just because I feel like even if it doesn't make it onto the page, the details are important to me as the writer. If I don't feel like the world is real, it's kind of like, I mean, like, this is like maybe a shitty comparison, but like, why are really good liars good at lying? Because they believe the lie, right? When they tell you, and that's how they trick you. Uh, if I'm lying to you about this world that I've created, it's not real. I'm gonna lie and tell you that it is. If I don't believe that it's real and have enough details to really stand on that, it's gonna be really freaking hard for me to write the story in a way that it feels real for the reader. So yeah, that's my process. And then to go back to Excel, when I do build out my scene by scene, I also, one of the columns is world building. And I'll put in which details I need to include. So I'm not creating world building details there. That's how I lay out how I'm going to parse it out so that I don't get too info dumpy and put too much in any one scene.
So it's a combination of that Ted Lasso quote that you quoted, and then having that believe sign on the top of the thing.
Yeah.
That's basically it, right? That's
Yeah,
the
that's it. There we go. You know what?
yeah.
Ted Lasso could be my writing coach. Let's just go with that.
He would be such a good writing coach, right?
He would be a
Um,
good anything coach.
um, if you were to inhabit Tamor, if you were to be sucked into your world,
I would
what
die
would you
immediately.
most? What would, if you let's say you survived for 10 minutes? What would you most like? Where would you most like to live? What would you most like to do?
That is another good question I've never been asked before. So I think I would most like to live in Gildemar, um, because I heavily based its world building on the south of France, which is a place I've never been and have always wanted to travel. So it's, you know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of vineyards and it's very beachy and warm and just beautiful climate. And, one of their main exports is wine. I like me some wine. I could go to Gildemar. Um, but yeah, so I think that's where I would most like to go. What I would most like to do, because that's the thing. Is this like reality? Like, because in reality, again, I would just get killed immediately, probably. Or best case scenario, maybe I like work on a farm and I survive. If I could be more badass version of myself, I think I could be like a tavern owner, like a tavern owner that is like, I am in on all the like scuttlebutt of what's going on, but I'm not actually like involved. You know what I mean? I feel like that could
You
be my vibe.
like on the very edge of a shenanigan without being fully inside of it.
Exactly. I like
Yeah.
inform the shenanigan. I provide the place where the shenanigans can be planned, and I ride that line right before, right? Like the law comes in and I'm like, "Oh, there's no shenanigans here. Go somewhere else." And then they leave and then I'm like, "Wink wink, gang guys, I got you." Right? There you go. That's my
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah. Like the shenanigan whisperer. That's the. I
See?
think that. Yeah, I think that in fact, the whisperer could be like your thing, like your name among the criminal
Ooh,
community. That would be
there
good.
we go. I could be the
The
whisperer.
the
And my
whisperer.
tavern
The
could be like the House of Whispers.
Oh, there you go.
You're building a
Perfect,
whole
perfect.
life for me now.
We're doing it. Yeah, yeah. Um, part of what I think you would be brilliant at is I think that you would be like an amazing blacksmith who only makes hatchets. You'd be like a
Oh, there
hatchet
we
smith
go.
because I honestly think like the way that you describe hatchets and the way you write about them and it's just like there's a clear love for it in there. It's like do you have hatchets?
I do have hatchets, and also, I literally have hatchets tattooed onto my flesh. But, I mean, this tattoo is actually in honor of Among Thieves, but I own hatchets. I've gone to, like, those axe throwing bars, that, they have and, had a great time. So I'm not, like, super proficient with a hatchet, but I had a lot of fun writing them. I gave Raya hatchets because I didn't wanna give her daggers. I wanted to give her something interesting, and different, and then the nickname The Butcher of Kerouac came to me one time, and I was like, "That's it. She's fighting with axes, let's go."
We've had enough sword and sorcery. But your book is kind of like more like hatchets and haberdashery of like
Oh,
the like
there we go.
with Ivan and with. I think you could have that as its own genre. It would be amazing.
I love
I
it.
think the thing about your about the way that you've written it, you know what you're saying about world building is that so the thing that stands out into everybody's mind is the characters and it's the banter and it's the unfolding of the plot and all of this. The world is so seamlessly sewn into your stories that the world building just comes naturally. It's like you're not worried about sort of like needing loads of exposition. You just can see it super clearly in your head. Like I was reading it and I could see it as kind of like playing out like a movie, or I could see it playing out like a video game, or like even like a like role playing D&D style game. I could see it, all of it. If your world had to be adapted into like another form of media, what would be like the dream adaptation for you?
Oh man. So I've said many times because people will usually ask like who are your fan casts, right? If it's going to be adapted to film. And I always say that I would actually rather see it as like an animated series, like adapted like in the style of like Arcane on Netflix. I feel like I would die of delight if it's just like that grimy element, right? That is done so well in that series. I feel like would translate really well in for Among Thieves. But yeah, if you know what, if someone were to create like a D&D campaign set in Timor, I think I would also like just fall over with delight. Like that would be pretty freaking cool. If someone was like just creating cuz like creating their own story within a world that I created that feels like it's growing and taking on a life of its own now outside of just me, which would be super magical if that happened. So
I feel like there's so many options for that as well. Because I was thinking, like, how everybody in the books has their own secret that they don't
yeah.
want sort of getting out there, or they've got their own agenda. I was thinking, like, when you go to a murder mystery party and you get like the second act is like you get something that you're not supposed to
Yeah.
let the other guests know. Imagine that in like a D&D setting of like every character has their own like little agenda, but still being part of the campaign. It would be
Oh my
it'd be
god,
awesome,
that
right?
would be so fun. That would be okay, someone
Yeah.
I know we have D&D fans, many of them that are watching and listening. So go for it.
Do
If
it,
you do it,
people, do it,
I
and
would be delighted.
Netflix
Yeah,
make that animated series happen.
right.
Yeah,
Netflix,
with
if you
Netflix are
happen to be
watching
watching.
everything. Yeah,
I'm sure.
there's someone from Netflix watching always. Like it's yeah, for
It's
sure.
like the NSA people, right? They're
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And NSA people talk to Netflix and make it happen.
right?
Yeah. um, we've hinted. I mean, this idea about Excel and spreadsheets and things, I am so fascinated by it. I totally dig it. Um, I have so many questions about how to use spreadsheets when you're plotting.
Yeah.
And for some people who are like listening to this or watching it, they'll be pantsers, and this will be like like
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
but
There are people
just
that
stick around.
die.
It's all
They hate
good.
it,
It's
yeah.
all good. Um, but with regard to like your when you're building your spreadsheets, how much time do you spend before you actually sort of open Excel? Just just purely like when you mentioned before about like just doing this brainstorming session, and how deep is that program like process before you convert it into a spreadsheet?
Super deep, because that, even what we've talked about before or so far, is just the world. I then will do that same process for each character. Um, and then I interview my characters. So I'll ask, my characters every, you know, 10, 20 questions or whatever, where I answer in their own voice about anything. A lot of it's stuff that's going to relate to the plot, but a lot of it is like, well, what's your Starbucks order? Right? Like stuff that is not relevant to the story, but just like tells me something about them and makes them feel more like a real person to me. Um, so I'll do that before I start opening Excel, and then I do brainstorm the plot. So, and I do a lot. A lot of this process is with pen and paper, which I know people will think is nuts, and that's completely fine that they think is nuts. But I just like find that I return to pen and paper a lot in my process. Like, even if I get stuck drafting, I will draft by hand for a few days. Every single edit, I do at least one pass where I print out the whole manuscript and I hand edit with not a red pen because that looks too angry, but like I'll do it with like a purple pen or something. Uh, but like, I do a lot. I return to by hand. And especially in those early conceptualizing stages, I just feel like handwritten, stuff on a messy page is a lot less, like, it's judging me less as it stares at me than the blank screen with the cursor is judging me, right? So I'll do that for the plot, and I will always make sure I have the major plot beats worked out, and only once I have all of that. So we're talking like it's usually at least a month or two before I even get into Excel. And then my Excel process, it's more of a zero draft than it is an outline, honestly, because I'm sussing out so many of the tiny details, or the little details, I guess not the tiny ones yet at that point. And that's probably several weeks to a month creating the Excel outline. And then I start drafting. Again, this process though, I've never written a novel under contract yet. So the, barren, and also I have a full-time day job. So you know what I mean? So like all of that, keep all that in mind. If that sounds really slow, it's because I've never had to work on a condensed schedule, and I have like other life commitments that make it hard to squeeze it in sometimes. But yeah, it's a lengthy process to get to that first draft for me.
But it, with the level of detail that you're putting into Excel, and I like that idea about a zero draft. I guess how much of the joy in writing is the Excel process? Because for a lot of people, there's a lot of joy in like the discovery aspect of it. But what you're discovering is you're building it in Excel. So how much of the pleasure of writing to you comes from that versus the actual drafting of it on the page?
Oh, none of the process that's happy comes from drafting. If I can swear really emphatically here, I fucking hate first drafts. Uh, I really do. I really hate them. I am actually like, and just, I know we've talked a lot about Excel. I'm actually discovery writing a project right now because I've tried to do it with my old process, and for whatever reason, every book is its own beast, and this book is just thwarting every attempt I have to outline. So I said, fine, I'll just try to write you. So whatever. You always got to be flexible. But yeah, the first draft for me is torture. I hate it a whole lot. The fun parts for me, yes, the outlining and creating an Excel, that is fun for me. That, I think, for me is most of where I get those like moments, where you're like, oh, yes, it's clicking like this. Oh my God. And then this will happen, right? That's where I get the majority of that magic. But the other fun part for me is the editing process. I love editing. I love it so much. So the first draft for me, it feels just like I'm stupid and don't remember how to speak English most of the time. Uh, because I'm trying, and I feel like the outline is always so pretty and perfect, and like this is a beautiful thing, and like the first draft is where I ruin it. I mean, it is, because it's not, but it is, because it's where, when you take something from an outline and put it into an actual book form, there's going to be stuff that doesn't translate. Things that you thought were going to just hit and be heart wrenching or be hilarious or whatever. And when it's actually in the draft, you're like, this doesn't work. This doesn't ring true. This isn't hitting for whatever reason. And that's when it starts to get messy and frustrating. And I hate it so much. So I usually just try to like power through the first draft as fast as I can. I'm a chronic underwriter for first drafts. So like my first drafts usually will clock in like 60,000 words maybe. So pretty short. And then when I'm actually editing is to me where I'm actually writing, because what I'm doing is I'm taking the bare bones stuff that I put into this giant Word doc. And now I mean, like I do all kinds of crazy things with editing. I mean, I guess they're probably not that crazy. People do all kinds of stuff. But like I've had times where I break down and I handwrite every scene onto an index card, and then I reorder them physically and I rewrite the project from there. Right? Like, I've had times where after the first draft, I have to go back to Excel and I have to re-outline, like a reverse outline, right? And go, okay, these are the parts that didn't work. This is what's missing. I need to add a scene here. This character isn't hitting, whatever. So yeah, I think I do feel that magic and discovery in the outline process, and I feel it in the editing process. And I feel largely despair in the drafting process. So there you go.
I was really intrigued by you saying about going back into Excel and re-outlining, because you mentioned earlier that as part of your ending, that a character did something that surprised you, and with all of the outlining that goes into it, there must still be room for surprises when you're
Yes.
writing the draft. So ev- everything that you write in the draft, how much are you then having to tweak? Would you say, like, generally in well, with Among Thieves and Thick as Thieves, how much of that was reworked because of that process of drafting?
Yeah, so I will say, with the exception of that thing that surprised me at the end of Thick as Thieves, pretty much the big pieces, like, if we're talking, save the cat, like plot point one, midpoint, plot point three, right? The big things generally stay the same, for the most part. In Among Thieves, though, I rewrote the heist part, like on the island, top to bottom like 4 times. Um, just because for various reasons it was like just not feeling, challenging enough, or it wasn't, this piece wasn't hitting, or this wasn't coming across. It didn't feel dangerous enough in this part. Whatever the case was. So that, I mean, there's just so much. I feel like it's especially when you talk to a discovery writer and they are horrified by the idea of outlining, which I completely understand. Like, it's everyone's. Well, I guess I'm discovery writing right now, but in general, I'm horrified by the idea of discovery writing. It's terrifying to me to sit down and have no idea what you're writing next. Like, wow, and it is terrifying as I'm doing it right now. It's hard. It's really hard. But I think there's always going to be things that surprise you, things that I think if you are an outliner and you still want to, or you want to explore outlining, but you want to maintain that magic of discovering in the moment, all it takes is to be open to it, right? Like, if I decided to doggedly follow my outline at every turn, I could do that as I'm drafting. But generally for me, I've learned over the years to like listen when my brain is telling me to explore an avenue, or that this isn't working and maybe explore this character or change this POV, something like that. I've learned to when to listen to that and go, okay, I am. You know what? Let's take this for a little ride and see how it goes. And I think the wonderful thing with writing is there's always another draft. Like, you always have another chance. If I completely screw this up and I take this a direction that sucks, oh well, I'll fix it later. I'll fix it in post, right? It's gonna be great. So yeah, I think that takes some of the pressure off too, of whether to follow the outline or whether to deviate or what to do. Just go with your gut at the moment and do what feels right. And if it doesn't work, fix it later.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just for any pantsers that are listening, this is my last question on Excel and spreadsheets. So don't worry, the torture will end soon. But no, I'm so fascinated by it because with me, I'm like, everything is about the idea of the story that I have, and then everything is informed by that. So I'm kind of like this. I've got like the idea of where it's going right from the beginning. So it's like the idea of pantsing to me is always pantsing with the idea in mind. And the idea
Yeah.
of plotting is like mapping out the idea. So for somebody who's like does it so intensely on the plot side, it's fast. I love talking about it. It's so like my last question is about the soggy middle because it's something that it's something that so many writers struggle with. Do you find that your process with using the spreadsheets helps you to avoid the soggy middle, or is that still a pitfall for you?
I think it lessens it, or in the very least, it makes it easier to navigate during the drafting process, right? Because I think so much of the soggy middle is like, okay, I know where I'm going, but I know this character has to grow in ways XYZ before we can get there. Or I know we need, this plot element needs to move to B and then to C before we can get there, right? I do think having a really intense outlining process helps me with that. Also, just in terms of like the emotional slog of writing the middle, because every writer knows there's that part where you're in the middle and all you want to do is write the fun climax or the next, you know what I mean? Like, but you're still, 10,000 words away from it or whatever. I do think for me, and again, I've talked to like Hannah Long, HM Long is a huge discovery writer, and she is horrified by my process, and it's so fun to talk to her about it. Uh, but like to her, what I'm about to say is a nightmare, but to me, it is like pretty essential. Um, if I sit down for the day and I genuinely don't know what I'm working on, and like for discovery writers like Hannah, it's like, oh my god, like I can work on anything. I'm so free. I can create. Right. For me, it's like I'm just paralyzed, right? Like I can't do anything. So like even now as I'm discovery writing this process, which maybe this makes it not discovery writing. I don't know the rules. Before I stand up after writing for the day, I have like a little section at the bottom of my Word doc and it says up next. And I literally just put 3 bullet points of what I'm going to work on tomorrow when I sit down or whatever. Because without that I'm lost. I need that jumping off point, especially when you're in the middle, um, because it can feel so sloggy and so overwhelming. And you can feel like you wrote for like 3 days and nothing happened. Um, which is no fun, right? And ultimately, like probably it means that you're going to end up cutting and reworking that in your edits. Because if nothing happens in 6,000 words or whatever, that's probably not good. Um, but maybe something did happen and it just didn't feel like something big enough to be rewarding while you're writing it. But yeah, I do think it helps me. But I can see where it would make things worse for a writer like Hannah, right? Who wants to feel that maybe the promise of sitting down and not knowing what you're going to discover today is what helps the slog, um, in the case of a writer like that. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate way to avoid the fear of the blank page
Yes.
is knowing what you're doing next. Yeah, I
Yes.
like
Well,
it.
and
I like
I
it.
never end on a scene, which I was told last time I said that. They're like, "Oh, like Hemingway." And I'm like, "Oh, did he do that then?" "Yes, I'm just like Hemingway." You're welcome." Uh, but, like, I mean, just for me, I like to start with the ball rolling. So if I finish a writing, sit down to write and I finish on the end of a scene, no, I didn't. I'm starting the next scene before I stand up for the day, because then when I sit down tomorrow, I have at least a little bit of momentum to push me forward, and it's less intimidating than starting a brand new scene on that day. So, yeah.
Awesome. Let's move on to just talk about conflict because there's something that I want to talk to you about, which I absolutely love about these characters and about the way that you've structured it into the books. Um, all of your characters are facing impossible choices and they struggle with the choices that they make. They're all active, none of them are passive, but they are all struggling. They all have like a personal conflict as well as the overall conflict of the story. When you're writing that, are you struggling with them? Are you sort of like relating to that? Or are you kind of in the background going like, like at this, like relishing the predicaments that you're putting them in? And the other thing I wanted to ask you about it is how important do you think that is, for storytelling, that you've got personal conflict as well as overall conflict to a book?
So, for your first question, it's like a little bit of both. Like, I feel bad for what I put my characters through, but also like, you know, as a writer, it is really satisfying when it's like, I have backed this character into such a corner. How will they ever get out? Like, and I think to me, that's where you you should start. Like when you're trying to create conflict, like don't start with like, oh, they just have this little, whatever. No, like they need to be a snarling wolf in a corner with no way out. That should be the starting point for your characters. Whatever. This sounds like dogmatic advice, which I hate, but like for me, that's how I approach things, right? Um, because that is where, I mean, like, and when a person is backed into a corner like that, that's when they're going to show their darkest qualities, which I think is fun to explore personally in fiction. But But yeah, that's definitely I enjoyed doing that, because it was a challenge for me too. Because there was several words like I backed them into such a corner. I was like, "Well, shit, as the writer, how can I get them out of this?" Right? Yeah, and then I forget the second half of your question because I got so involved in being a puppet master, with the first half.
It was just about whether you think it's important for a story that the characters go through personal conflict
Oh,
as well as
yes.
overarching conflict.
Yes, and that is a great question, and I think so for any character that you want your audience to sympathize with. So that was why it was so important for me to back every character basically into a corner in Among Thieves, and Thick as Thieves, because I wanted them all to be set, basically diametrically opposed to one another in terms of their ultimate goal. And I wanted to head hop, and but I wanted my biggest goal was to have the reader be reading and not know who they wanted to win. Or maybe have a character they thought they wanted to win. Oh, I really want, Raya to come out on top. She's an asshole, but she's my girl, right? And then we read a Tristan chapter and we go, oh, I feel really bad for this kid. Like, God, maybe Tristan can win. And then you read an Ivan chapter and you're like, well, God, Ivan has to win, right? That's what I was kind of hoping for, right? And so I do think that any character that doesn't have that personal stake built in, and you can use this as a a tool as well. But if you don't build that personal stake in, I think that is going to be the character the audience is going to be less likely to sympathize with as they're reading. So, yeah, I think it is important if you want the characters to be relatable. And if you want your audience to put themselves in the character's shoe, it's important. If it's a character you want your audience to have a degree of separation from, then I feel like it's less important, if that makes
That's
sense.
a really, really good answer. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, so relatability and sympathy, that's your key for like when you choose to up the stakes personally. That's a really, really
Yeah.
good tip. Yeah, I love it. Um, I want to talk to you about something that we both love, which is Redwall, because it's
Yes.
awesome. Um, how important do you think it is, like to have that kind of thing, as a writer, where you've got a series that you grow up loving, that kind of like influences your imagination? Is that important for you as a writer to have had?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, like, Redwall was my gateway drug to fantasy, right? Like, that was the first fantasy stuff that I really read and got obsessed with and like so into. And then, of course, I got into like the Warrior Cats books, right? Then I started getting into all the talking animal books. Because I feel like that's just like a natural pipeline. But yeah, I think it is important. And not even just important, I think it's like an inevitability, right? Um, I think pretty much every writer has that artistic touch point. And maybe it's not a book series, right? Like, I think for most of the authors and writers that I know, it is. But maybe video games are really plot heavy these days. Maybe it was a video game series that the story just captured their heart and took them on a ride that they never wanted to leave. Maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's even music. Maybe they got really into, playing Dungeons and Dragons and then they started crafting their own campaigns and that's their thing. So I think to me it's more I don't know if it's like you I think it's just a commonality maybe between all writers is that we have that predisposition to connect with the story and really get obsessed with it. And for me and for you, it sounds like it was Redwall, Brian Jacques, my
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, Martin the Warrior. When I read that, spoiler alert, and Rose died. Um, as like sort of like 10-year-old me, I was just like sobbing. It was the first book that like absolutely
Gosh,
destroyed me, and I was like, I'm never reading books again. I obviously like I did,
that didn't
but
take.
it was just yeah. But honestly, it was like it took me places I didn't know that books could take you. It was just
Yeah.
yeah, it blew my mind. And then from then, just every Redwall book, it was just like, yeah, gotta yeah.
Oh
So
yeah, when they're dark,
Martin is my mouse,
they're pretty dark for kids books too. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
they are technically middle grade, aren't they, or YA? But
yeah.
they
Well,
are
yeah, but
they're
they read well just as like for adults. It's just like
they
it's
do. Well,
great. I
that's the
was
thing. I reread a few of them like during the pandemic just because I really needed like just a double dose of nostalgia stat. And I was like, because you go back and you read some books that you liked as a kid and you read them again as an adult and you're like, yeah, that's a kid's book, it's fine, but whatever. And these books, I read them when I was like, literally, I was in like fifth grade. I was like 9 or 10 when I was reading the first time. And as I was reading it as an adult in my 30s, I was like, oh my God, I read this at like 9 or 10. Like, this is pretty, this is pretty heavy for a 10-year-old. But yeah, they're good. They're ultimately the good guys win, right? Like they're very wholesome in that way. Yeah, it was a solid series of books.
I always take one away on holiday, and so whenever you see me, like if I'm ever by a pool, I will be reading a Redwall book. It's just
My
like
God,
it's
I
yeah.
love that so much. What's your
That
favorite
is
one?
great.
Do you have a
Oh
favorite?
well, for me,
Martin the
it
Warrior?
always has to be Martin the Warrior, yeah, because
Fair.
that was the first one that was just yeah, it just grabbed me like that. So it will always be
Yeah.
special. But I cannot read it again. I cannot. It's like I picked it up. I picked it up recently and sort of
You
read
know
the
what's
first few
coming.
pages and was like, no, no, not, it's not going to
You're not
happen.
gonna
Like
break my heart again. Oh my
yeah.
God, I love that.
Yeah, but no, but you're right about influences because I think that is the start of your journey as a storyteller.
Yeah.
Is in the stuff that you take in is the stuff that goes up here, and then this is the tool that you use to tell stories. And yeah, it's great. It's really it's a fun process, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
The last thing I want to ask you about is because you're working full time, your writing is awesome, and you are somehow miraculously managing to absolutely rock SFF Addicts as co-host with Adrian. You've been doing it since January, and the episodes are awesome to listen to. And I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this will be longtime fans of SFF Addicts. What's that been like for you? What's been like your experience with that?
It's been really busy, I'm not gonna lie. I will say so for SFF Addicts, I am fortunate that, I mean, like, yes, I'm involved in, like, the planning of the episodes and the recording of the episodes, but, Adrian does all of the editing and the publishing. So, like, the production side of the house, that is all my boy Adrian. I don't have to do any of that, which, obviously frees up my schedule a bit because it's time consuming to do that back end stuff. But yeah, I am also fortunate in that all three of those endeavors are 100% remote. So my day job is 100% remote, which is so helpful in terms of, and it's a flexible schedule. So like behind the curtain a little bit, like we are recording this right now at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I just was able to clock out of my day job for a couple hours and then I'll just clock back in when we're done recording and finish out my day. So you know what I mean? It does make it really easy to kind of move the puzzle pieces of life around one another. So I'm definitely have a lot of privilege in that regard because I know originally I was working in an office full time and writing and that was before I came on the podcast and stuff. And that was a lot harder to manage because, A, you have the commute, but B, it's just like doing stuff like this in the middle of the day or whatever. I would have to take a half day and come home and, it's just a lot more, trickier to manage. But yeah, I mean, I would just, anyone that is out there also juggling the the creative endeavor and day job shuffle, which is a lot of us, I know. hang in there. You got it. Steal those tiny pockets of writing time and guard them furiously and viciously and passionately. Uh, and, even if, I feel like I compare myself a lot to people that will say, oh, I always write 2,000 words a day, or I wrote 10,000 words this week, or, whatever. And I'm always like, oh my God, I'm such a failure. Like, I suck at life. Like, I cannot, I think it's important not to play the comparison game, which I suck at it too. We all do it. But yeah, like if you like my goal right now for I'm drafting is 500 words a day. Sometimes I exceed that, sometimes I don't, but I just am being kind to myself and knowing that I have a lot of other stuff going on. So if that's your goal too, or if your goal is 250 words a day or 100 words a day, or you can only write every third day or only on the weekends, like all of that is valid. You're still a writer. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Um, there you go.
Yeah, that is the perfect way to wrap it up. Like, steal the tiny pockets. You're still a writer. That is awesome. And with whatever you're working on next, I'm not gonna sort of like ask you to sort of like dish out any secrets and spoiler things, but yeah, I hope that it is that you're having fun with it, and I hope it's awesome. And an Excel free MJ Kuhn book will be exciting to read,
Who
right?
even am I?
Can you just tell everybody before we let you go, back to your day job, where can they find you? So on your socials, and if they wanted to connect.
Yeah, so you can find me across like all the major socials, so Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I'm at MJ Kuhn Books. You can also just find me at mjkuhn.com. And then don't forget, you can read Among Thieves and pre-order, or maybe by the time this is out, order Thick as Thieves. And I hope you love them. Okay, that's all.
Thank you so much, MJ. You are the queen. You are no squire. And thank you for all the shenanigans today.
Yes, thank you for having me on. This has been so fun.